policy planning and research.
Yep.
All right, go right ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. Great to be back before you.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
And you're all here this time, so
Yeah,
I'm really.
now here.
So before I get started, I just thought I would do some more context setting from last time I was here. You may recall when I was here last time, I talked about, policy planning and research. People are like, well, what do you guys do? And the reality is I say that we're the incubator of all ideas. So whether it's a legislative study that one of you might recommend or might come out of the legislative process, could be a new federal initiative that comes out, could be something that comes just as a good idea internal to the agency. Those ideas come to policy planning and research, and we're the ones who convene groups of individuals, could be interdisciplinary within the agency, folks from external to the agency. We sit down, we walk through, we talk about the particular issue, and then make a decision about, does it require statute changes? Perhaps it's just a matter of we need to develop a policy. And I'm going to use an example. You mentioned, I heard you talking about art in the right of way when you came in here. That's a perfect example of a recent policy that we've been involved in the development of, convening a bunch of people from across the agency to talk about how do we do this. And now we actually have a formal policy so that whether you ask if you can paint the controller box, signal controller box in Bennington, and you ask in South Burlington, you will get the same answer because we now have a policy. Before, communities were getting different responses. So I just use that as an example of one of the recent ones we do, but what we do is across all aspects of the agency. We support all sections of the agency.
I caution you for, if you get a lot of requests from Senator Chip.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Be careful.
you got a couple hours,
Now
you
that
got some ideas.
Now that he's found out where you can go for resources.
Yes.
So just.
Yeah.
You say a lot of good ideas come to you. Do you get bad ideas?
Well, we do get ideas that we,
That's why I
yes,
caution.
we do. We get ideas from all over the spectrum. And it's a matter of diving into them and figuring out, is this something that has application and applicability to Vermont? And if so, how do we advance it? Or not advance it? If it looks like it's not something that's achievable, maybe this is, like, here's a great example of, Joe Segali in the past has come to you and talking about automated vehicle testing in Vermont. And it's something that he dedicated a fair amount of time to. But in the reality, the technology now has advanced so much nationally that the reality of testing in Vermont is probably not going to happen. But it's an example of where we kind of take something in and we figure out, does this have application in Vermont? And if so, this is what we should do. If not, perhaps it's something we just monitor on the national.
Automated driving, that's something.
But it's already in your car. There's automated aspects in our cars now. So, but it's one of those pieces of examples of, it's a technological advancement that's pushing policy and planning, because over
We
time.
did some automated testing on Lake Willoughby last year on the ice. I can't remember that.
Don't know.
I just remember something about that.
I don't know. So just to help set that context before we get started here and kind of dive down in. So in the policy planning and research section, is there a way to get rid of this?
Function F11, go full screen. Function.
F11. F11.
Should go full screen. View full screen.
I don't know. I've never had this happen.
Did Michelle have a principal assistant or a assistant director last time?
Yes.
She had
Yes.
all
Yep.
those three positions.
So I'm going to continue on. I'll move that around if it's in the way of text in future slides. But so I just wanted to start with the org chart for all of policy planning and research. Policy planning and intermodal development. So this is the org chart for our entire division. However, there are two branches that are not fleshed out here, and that's public transit, rail, and aviation. Those have branches that go off them. Why I'm showing you this is because in policy planning and research budgets, we also have elements of the division's expenses that extend outside ours. So Michelle's, the central office, the general admin part of our org chart, their budget is incorporated into policy planning and research, as is the public outreach section. So those boxes that are shaded with a light yellow background are the sections that are represented in the budget that I'm going to be presenting to you. I do also want to point out, because you're going to be hearing from Andrea right after this, you see the environmental policy and sustainability. And you may recall when I was here last, we talked about the fact that we're proposing that section be elevated on the organizational chart to report directly to Michelle. And so we're in the process of pulling out her budget. Previously, it was part of policy planning and research, pulling out her budget so that it can be tracked independently from the rest of our budget. So Andrea will present on hers next, following me. Any questions on that before I? Okay. So I'm just going to give a little overview of some of the things that we do undertake in our section. As I mentioned, we have all the operational administrative support costs are in our budget. We have the policy and planning section. We do a whole host of things in this particular section. I think the most important ones to probably highlight for you has to do with all of our IIJA implementation and monitoring of what goes on at the federal level. That all occurs in policy and planning. We also are responsible for all of the bill monitoring and analysis at the federal as well as at the state level. So all the bills that you folks are going to be dealing with, our staff are also reviewing it. And then things like the Transportation Equity Framework, you may recall that's a big focus statewide these days. And that study is being undertaken and staffed by Policy Planning and Research section. We also do all the cross-border initiatives as well as all the New England interactions with all of our sister agencies in surrounding states and provinces. We do all the long-range planning in the state for the Agency of Transportation, and we do all the modal planning. So whether it's rail, aviation, freight, bike ped, all that work is centered out of our section.
Let's get a train to Montreal, come on.
We're working on that. That's staffed through us.
Since I've been a kid, I've been working on it.
Across
We got to Burlington, Montreal's next.
So the cross-border is for all modes of transportation.
Yes, yep. And then we also have the public outreach section, and I know you folks are familiar with, and particularly for Senator Mazza in particular knows how we've come a long way in our ability to communicate with the public and share information. And
So do we still have 511?
I believe we do, but I believe,
That's the line you always called and you never were very happy with.
yeah, I believe they're
I
believe they're transitioning to something else. That's over in the fleet, maintenance and fleet part of the agency, but they can provide you a more complete answer, or we can
Drive
get
slow,
you.
flush it slow.
And you're familiar with our agency's fact book and annual report. That's done through our public outreach section. And they do a tremendous amount of outreach, public outreaching involving our construction projects and communicating to the public construction timelines and delays and those sorts of things. So a really important function that we now do. Another significant part of what we do in policy planning and research is our cooperative relationship. We've had for 30 years now, hard to believe, we've had this cooperative relationship with the state's regional planning commissions where they provide us assistance. They develop regional transportation advisory committees based of stakeholders and municipal representatives from each of their respective regions, and they advise us on all matters of transportation, and they assist us in our public outreach requirements that by both state statute as well as federal law we're required to do.
We ask this periodically.
Sure.
Some towns, in fact, do not have a representative to the RPC's TAC.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how many towns do not?
Well, we know we have an annual
you know.
performance reporting that we do with the regional planning commissions. And one of the things that we ask them to report on is the number of municipalities that are actively engaged in the transportation planning initiative. That's what this 30-year relationship is called. And this year, the statistics are 241 municipalities. So I think you could do the math to figure that there are how few communities are not actively involved.
I expect that. It used to be much less, but.
Yeah,
people
yeah,
realize
it's inching, it's been
you're not
inching
at
up
the
year
table,
to year.
you're on the menu, as Neil said.
That's a good one.
So,
Yeah.
it's important to be
Yeah.
there.
So yeah, we have
Otherwise, Senator
241.
Chidden would be first in line.
Yes, I know.
First week, I thought you were gonna say.
No, well, you're always at the table.
It's a fitting segue to the next thing I was going to mention. So We have 11 regional planning commissions in the state, and we have one in particular, that being Chittenden County, that is a designated metropolitan planning organization. It meets specific requirements. It receives monies directly from the Federal Highway Administration. They are, however, administered through VTrans. So they come to us, we have a grant, we administer them to. So when I get into the budget part, you'll see there's quite a difference in the metropolitan planning funding versus what the other regional planning commissions get into, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. I wanted to underscore, why is this relationship with the region so important? They're absolutely instrumental in our being able to communicate to communities what we're doing and how it impacts them, whether it's an individual project or they help us with our project prioritization. The municipalities and the RPCs now have a seat at the table in prioritizing projects, and that goes into our prioritization system.
Who funds the RPCs?
So the RPCs are funded through the property transfer tax. They get a portion, that's their base. Their enabling legislation is through. And then the funding we utilize is some of our statewide planning and research dollars.
But they also do a lot of grant writing, so they get administrative funding through those.
Yeah, their enabling legislation and their base funding comes from the property transfer proportion of the property transfer. We also have mapping sections part of what we do. So every map you see, and I suspect you might even know, you don't have one in here.
Well, we used to,
Yeah.
and now we have a screen.
Yeah. Well, every map pretty much that's generated by any state agency in Vermont, our mapping section had something to do with, because they're responsible for keeping track of all of the transportation information on there. So the road centerline data, the municipal roads, all of those features are all kept through the mapping section, which is a part of policy planning and research, even though it's not in the name of it. Then we also have our research section, which does a lot of research. A portion of it is federally mandated. We do a lot of outreach and work with both universities as well as some consulting firms that have research entities within them. And we do research on a whole host of topics. It could be material specific, so what kind of binder we use in pavement, all the way to subjects like what's the relationship between greenhouse gases and vehicle miles traveled. So it's all can be across the whole research gamut. And then we also have our permitting services section, and this is the only section within our bureau that is funded 100% with state dollars, and that is because it's section 1111 is the statute within state statute, and it's the highway access permit requirements. So we have a section that deals exclusively with that. And that section also has an individual embedded in it who deals with all of the Act 250 applications, so that VTrans has party status. And, so that's the overview of our section. I'm going to dive into the budget if you don't have any additional questions. So I do need to say right up front that, so we are tab 7 in the white book, and there was an error that was found in our budget. So the original copy, I don't know if you guys have gotten the updated pages yet or
I
not.
think we did, right, Mike? Yes.
Okay.
Did you put them in a box or?
Let me get your book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you now have the correct pages in the white book. My understanding is the black book, they haven't updated the pages yet, but maybe Mike knows.
I have.
Okay, so refer to the white book, but the numbers I'm presenting to you are the correct numbers, not those that were previously in the book. So here's our funding sources. Where does our funding come from? And let me
More than 1.7 or is just 7A?
just 7 is us. And then 7A is Andrea's budget. So just to highlight sort of where our funding comes from, we have obviously 3 sources. About 80% of the funding in policy and planning research is federal dollars. So the vast majority of our programs, with the exception of one I mentioned before, the Section 1111 process, are federally participating programs. And you can see in this overall, there's a just under 25% decrease. And that is due to the removal and the decoupling of the environmental policy and sustainability section that Andrea and Patrick will be talking to you about next. So that's where that reduction comes. So pulling out, decoupling their budget.
See it up on 7A then.
Exactly, yep. Yes, you will. And then the other important thing to note on this is in FY23, you'll see we had this, the decoupling, the primary funding source for that was the NEVI, the electric vehicle charging infrastructure funds were put into our budget, and those are being taken out. So what you're going to see when Andrea and Patrick get up here is that plus more, because they've got other funding categories that are under their jurisdiction. So that is where this primary reduction in the federal funds is. It's that NEVI program, the National Infrastructure, National EV, electric vehicle. Yeah, see, I don't even know the acronym on that, electric vehicle infrastructure program. And so, and we get a small amount of interdepartmental transfer, because one of the programs we oversee is the Better Connections Program, and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and the Agency of Natural Resources contribute small amounts of funds towards that program. So that's what that interdepartmental transfer is about. I should mention that this budget does include a 3% sort of across the board increase, which is typical for most budgets you'll be seeing. And then just a different variation and breakdown on our budget, showing you the personal services. So that's all of our staffing costs, our operating costs, our rent, our copiers, those staples that you had to take out of that printout earlier. And then grants that we administer, and you can see that that's those NEVI dollars being taken out of our budget results in a significant reduction in the grants category. And then just to give you a pie chart, so you can see sort of how does everything break out by each section within our bureau. I mentioned we have general administration is about 7%. The policy and planning, again, that's the general planning work that we do is about 20%, public outreach 2%, and so on. I did want to point out here, because the question gets asked a lot, or got asked at House Transportation, you can see that the regional planning commissions, the RPCs, and it says TIP grants, that's our cooperative relationship with the regional planning commissions. And that's about $2.4 million annually, and that's divided up amongst all 10 of the non-MPO regions. And then the pass-through directly to the MPO, you can see, is $4.2 million.
But the MPO pass-through would be to support functions beyond what the RPCs are doing with the, to the grants to the RPC. If you look at it, I mean, 4.2 compared to the 2.4, it seems like if it's only for the same activities that the RPCs are doing, it seems like you've got a lot of money coming into the MPO. So it's more than the transportation piece, or not?
Correct. Well, under the federal legislation, when you have a designation as a metropolitan planning organization, you have unique and different responsibilities. So they have responsibilities to a higher degree than what the other regional planning commissions do through the region,
and that's reflected
transportation
in the amount of funding.
Exactly, yeah. The federal statutes are actually more restrictive for the metropolitan planning organizations than they are for state DOTs when it comes to planning. So they're really very prescriptive. They have specific activities and specific documents that they must maintain. So yes, it is much more complex and much more detailed. And they have additional, significantly more responsibilities and significantly more authority to, like, for example, to scope projects. None of the other regional planning commissions can go through a full-on scoping project. They just don't have the financial resources or the staffing levels to be able to do that, but the MPO does. And I think that's it. This is my contact information.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I was just going to ask about other differences in the MPO. There's additional responsibilities. You say scoping. Are there anything else that comes to mind as to how they're different in their responsibilities?
The MPO has a requirement to maintain 4 different documents. They have to have their long-range transportation plan. They have to have what's called the Transportation Improvement Plan. They have to have what's called a Unified Planning Work Program, and that's their annual work program that outlines how are they going to spend their $4.3 million over the year. And then they're also required to have a public participation plan, and they're required to keep those documents updated on a regular basis. And they also have authority to use those funds, as I said, to do scoping and much more deeper dives into the feasibility of projects than what the regional planning commissions do. And they have a whole staff. I mean, the other side of this, they have the staffing levels to be able to support a much more robust program than we're able to fund through the other regional planning commissions.
Does the MPO get other federal funding to support other activities in other sectors?
Yes, yes, they get funding from brownfields, they get funding from all different sources. They're still the regional planning commission, so they still qualify as a regional planning commission for so many other funding sources that any of the other regional planning commissions would be.
I
So
don't know if they had other pass-through
Yeah.
funding from federal agencies.
I don't know that I would call them pass-through, because I don't know that they're designated specifically for them, but they do have a host of other funding sources that is part of their budgets, just like all the other regional planning commissions. And the other thing, because I often get this when people see the difference in the numbers and they're like, well, why does Chittenden County get all the money? I have to give them a lot of kudos because they utilize their funds to support all the other regional planning commissions. They're very, very cooperative and generous in working with all the other regions and trying to kind of help everybody bring up their transportation planning expertise and knowledge. So, and I'm sure Charlie Baker will probably come in if he hasn't already, and the regional planning commissions will come in and talk more about it, but.
Okay.
A quick question, sorry if I
Sure.
missed this on the UBM Transportation Center.
Yeah.
I assume you work with them on doing.
Yeah, so our research folks, yep, are in regular communication. In fact, we've got a meeting coming up here where we want to have some conversations with them about research projects that they're doing, and they get a fair amount of funding from other sources, and we want to talk to them about how do we collaborate, because a lot of the stuff they're working on has some interest in application here,
Right.
and how do we better
There's not
cooperate.
normal funding that goes through you to them.
There is not a direct allocation. They are like any other research entity or any other educational institution eligible for submitting proposals for work that we put out. The only thing we directly link to them is our travel demand model is currently managed by UVM. That's the only thing I can think of, and it's a very small contract. I think it's in the maybe $60,000 a year.
Well, there was an issue, go ahead.
So since you brought it up, just so you know, my other role that I spend a lot of time on is at UVM, right next to the Transportation Center, Research Center. And so I know Dr. Rovenville pretty well. And just if I can do anything, there's a lot of interest to work as well and more as possible with VTrans. And if I can help facilitate any of that, I stand at the ready.
Great, that's good to know.
Because wasn't there issue several years ago, some research being done by the University of New Hampshire, even though we have a.
Money was getting sent to other states, and those states had policies where they didn't allow it to leave the state. So there was some concerns raised. Why is Vermont allowing dollars? But it has to do with expertise and what you were looking for payment.
Yep.
But know that UVM is a ready and willing partner, and would love to do more with VTrans.
State colleges are prepared.
State colleges are fine too. Just keep it in Vermont, right?
Thank you.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
appreciate it. Okay, next we have. Gee, good morning, all right.
Good morning.
Here's the one copy you got.
Thanks.
Decided last minute this morning to improve the extra slides. That's not my presentation, but I want to talk about it. So,
Okay, what would you like to discuss with us this morning?
well, I'd like to try to get into the Zoom link here. So
Okay.
slides that. Oh. This is a meeting host will let you into.
Did you get my
I'm trying
email?
to find it, see if it has it. Well, along.
Do you want me to reconnect and see if it prompts you?
Well, I took quite a bit of.
You have all the, try that. Well, that's what I'm getting from the teacher, some template.
Well, this is a good template for your reply,
Yeah.
except the first paragraph won't work for you.
I'll be sure to. I'm not misrepresenting what I. Yeah.
Right. Okay, here comes.
The legislatures.
Last year, right, last year worked hard.
You want to turn your microphone off and your speakers?
Our bond rating actually reflected what we did for, for
Right.
maintaining our AA plus.
Right. Which other states don't have.
I've got some bad ideas I want to fix.
All right.
Oh, my God. You gotta sleep better at night.
Yeah.
I liked it better when he was sleepy last week.
Yeah, right. Wish,
He didn't have his mouth open, he was just yawning.
yeah, right. Yeah,
Or the week that he was.
I just went.
Yeah, that was-
The first-
That was a good week.
That first week.
Yeah, that first week was really great.
Says host disabled participant screen sharing. Could I share my screen, please?
I hear one more plug for you, yeah.
House Transportation has this nice wire that you just plug into the side and it's like,
Hooks to the screen.
yeah, you don't have to be on Wi-Fi or anything. It's
Yeah.
super nice.
Yeah, we have all this.
It's just like plugging into a monitor.
We have chocolate.
Yeah,
That's good.
that's the house
That's a good
that
substitute.
Puppies and all.
No,
Oh, yeah, that will take away any.
Am I doing it? Am I able to do it now? Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Don't overstep your mic. Can I help or anything?
You wrote out your whole script here.
I know, I do that.
Bullets. I don't worry about verbs and stuff or descriptives.
Or punctuation. Beside the
Well,
bullet.
no, because
Is that
it's,
working yet?
Looks like it will. Let's see.
some feel so good.
Nice day.
Are we supposed to get another, it's supposed to get very brutally cold this
I
week.
think snow is all done for a while.
It's pretty chilly out there right now. I've walked in from my house. 23 and windy.
But I think this weekend it's supposed to get like 20 below or something.
Yeah.
My mother would say we need a good snow and below.
All right, we all set?
Not really, but. It's not the way I want to be seeing it, but. I'll make it work. I'm a note reader, so I need my notes. It's not showing up the
can't
way
see.
it's not in presentation mode, but that's okay.
We need the HDMI cable that we don't have.
I know, so easy, but so hard.
Has, seem to have all the technology.
That's the shed.
Yeah.
I'll fit some chocolates.
Very nice. Okay, so good morning, I'm Andrew Wright, I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at V-Trans, and I'm here with Patrick Murphy, my colleague, he's Sustainability and Innovations Project Manager. And we're gonna go into the budget for our new program here. But first, we're gonna just start with some background and some history to kind of tell the story of how we decided to make a separate section here. And this is where I'm going to go into that slide that I handed out but don't have, so I'll leave it on the screen for now. I just wanted to explain because I don't know that we ever really get the opportunity to come in and talk to the transportation committees about how the agency is organized around environment. And so I won't go through everything that's in the notes. You guys can read that. One thing I just wanted to point out is that we have recently revised our mission and vision statements to include environment and sustainability, and that it just speaks to the sort of what's going on around the state and the nation, and just the culture that exists at VTrans around environment, and that I'm happy to be a part of, and have been happy to be a part of for the last 20 plus years. So, so yeah, that's an environment and sustainability is sort of back into the mission. It was there and then left, and now it's back. So a good foundation there. I just wanted to explain, we have what we call the 4 pillars of environment in the agency, and you can kind of see they're spread out over 3 divisions. So in the policy planning and intermodal division, development division, we have our group, policy and sustainability. We'll go into more detail about what we do, but just quickly, the highway division has the Project Delivery Bureau environmental group, and they basically support projects and activities to get permits through trying to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts of those activities, and then get the permits required when we can't avoid. They have staff, they have cultural resources staff, they have biologists, they have stormwater staff, landscape architect, and then they have general permitting group that does a lot of the construction stormwater permitting. They do Act 250 and MEPA in that group. And so they're not all about permitting. They also have some initiatives that they do, and I just provided a couple of examples. We have the Highways and Habitats. It's about road ecology, and it's a training program that has been in place for at least a dozen years, maybe a little bit more, and over 200 to 300 staff from the agency have been through that program to sort of just say, we have transportation infrastructure and it goes through a lot of natural areas, and this is how we can build so that we can enhance or allow for the connectivity of ecological connectivity through our roadway systems. And that program, that training program that we have, received an Environmental Excellence Award last year from Federal Highway. And it is really a model for a lot of other states across the country. So just little Vermont leading the way in that. And then another example of some initiatives coming out of the Project Delivery environmental section is reuse of historic trusses. So we have a lot of historic trusses around the state, and they are no longer serviceable for vehicles. So we can take them out and put them into a reuse, we call it. And so we have right now on the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, we have several bridges coming from different parts of the state to be delivered there. And so there'll be historic signage and kind of explaining where it came from and give a little history lesson along the trail. It's like a little place to stop and learn about Vermont. So some kind of neat things coming out of that program. And then also in the highway division, we have, oh, sorry.
You just mentioned historic trusses. I have Senator McDonald mentioning a Stafford historic truss bridge. Is that on your radar at all? They're trying to reuse the truss in Stafford. No.
I'm not sure if that's one that might be going. I know there's,
Never mind.
it's not on my radar, but it probably is on Nick Work's radar.
I have a bridge in Barrie. It's a train bridge that I'm trying to get rid of.
I know about that bridge. We're doing a study. Yes.
You want to get rid of it?
Yeah, we're trying to get somebody to buy it from us.
You might have to sell it.
308, the trestle?
What are you asking?
Bridge 308, is that?
Yeah, just that ends at the no longer operational branch.
Right. We have a brick grant that we're going to be doing a study, an alternatives analysis on that. And we should be getting back to the town because we just programmed that. We're going out for.
Representative Anthony would be very happy.
Yes.
To see.
Yeah.
Why do they want to get rid of it?
It's because the bridge has a pier right in the middle of the river, and they worry that it's a flood hazard.
That's what we're going to study and come up with alternatives.
So it's, yeah, if you got nice.
Because the bridge isn't used anymore.
Yeah.
The granite shed is closed, so no trains have gone over the bridge for years. So they'd like to get rid of it or make it a bridge without a pier in the river. Which
Maybe
So
that
somebody
is
bought
one
it
of
from
the
us.
alternatives that could be.
they could use it for historic.
That's right.
Bridge.
So again, in construction, we have an environmental team of 1 that does compliance to make sure that all of the requirements that are put into the construction contracts are carried out. And if there's changes in construction, that those changes are evaluated. Do they need further permitting? And then finally, in our maintenance and fleet division, we have the pollution prevention and compliance section. I think Jen Callahan was here talking to you about some of the work that they do. They kind of oversee some of the longer term water quality permitting, like our TS4 permit, flow restoration and phosphorus control plans, and they have the hazardous materials group in that section, and also oversee the pesticide program. So I just want to provide that background to say, like, there's all these different parts of the agency that have environment in them. It's spread out. We've talked about combining them, but we like it spread out. We collaborate often on all sorts of things, MOAs and legislative bills that are proposed, and just a lot of collaboration going on there. So just to provide that background, because again, I don't think we've really ever had the opportunity to do that.
So do you have a lot of interaction with folks at DEC?
Yeah, we have a monthly meeting. That's definitely for A&R or for any really other state agency. That's the entity that we collaborate with most often. Patrick will get into it too probably, but we have a lot of crossover with them on electric vehicle charging stuff, also with ACCD on that, but we have monthly meetings with DEC to just lay things on the table and say, this is what's coming, this is what's an issue, you know, we have a permit problem here at the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail or whatever. Yeah, lots of collaboration on contaminated soils. There's a plethora of topics.
I would think so.
Yeah. Okay, so
Well, here we are.
We're back. We're back. So, okay, I want to have time to get into what Patrick's going to talk about and the numbers actually. So, moving on.
We have Patrick again tomorrow morning.
Patrick's in there all the time. So.
Yeah, whatever you
Bless you.
can finish, today, because we've already got about another 10.
Okay, so I'll just go through this really quickly. We've got 3 buckets of federal formula funds, and I just want to go over some of the components and nuances of each. So really quickly, we've got the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, and that has a requirement for a NEVI plan to be submitted annually. It needs to be approved for us to be able to access the funding. Funds need to be spent on EV charging on designated corridors, and then the match on that is 80-20 federal and local match, and we will have that match met by the private sector. So those people who are installing the infrastructure. We have the carbon reduction program that has a requirement for a carbon reduction strategy to be developed, and that is in development through a consultant contract right now. We will be seeing a draft by the end of the summer, and that is due to Federal Highway for approval by mid-November of this year, and then every 4 years after that. We can access the funds before that plan is approved, so we have access to those funds now. The funds can be spent on a wide range of carbon reduction projects, and 50% of that apportionment can be flexed out to other programs. Again, the 80-20 match. And then we have the Protect program, where we are developing in-house, we're developing a resilience improvement plan. It is a recommended plan, it's not required, and funds to be spent on resiliency projects, and again, has that 50% flexibility to other programs.
That would be for projects, for example, that would, I don't know, flood prone roads or something to make them more resilient.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what the Protect program would help support.
Yes.
In the CRP, the plan or the proposals due November 23?
Yeah.
So something you're working on, I assume it's Patrick.
I'm working on that with Cambridge Systematics. And I could go into a lot more detail on that, but we don't have time for that. It's being developed in 2 phases, and we're starting just now on our public outreach and stakeholder engagement. And we will be reaching out to a group of elected officials and talking with Senator White and Representative Stebbins about how to organize that group. But we will be coming to that group twice. On that. Again, one of the interesting things about the Protect program is it has the 80-20 split, but if states do a resilience improvement plan, that gets reduced by 7%. And then if that resilience improvement plan is incorporated into the long range transportation plan or the metropolitan transportation plan, it gets further reduced by another 3%. In the interest of time, I'm gonna do we think we should skip these slides?
In the NEVI plan, don't we already have one? But
That's right, yeah.
Proposed,
Yes.
has that been accepted?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that money on that slide is already being kind of deployed or prepared to be deployed. Right?
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm
That's
just gonna get
21
into that. So I'm gonna skip those slides because we just don't have that much time. If we have time, we can go back and talk about some of the eligibilities or the types of projects that would be included in these programs. That was the carbon reduction program. This is the Protect program. And then our most active program right now, because we already do have an approved plan, and this has been sort of the first announced federal formula program, is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. Patrick has a few slides on that.
Sure. So for the record, I'm Patrick Murphy with Vermont Agency of Transportation. We're going to go into this tomorrow morning, so we don't need to dive right in. But we'll just say that the plan was approved back in September. And so last year, the legislature authorized $6.25 million to be able to begin work on that. 4.25 of that is NEVI funds, $2 million is ARPA funds. So all of those 3 main federal buckets of funding are through federal fiscal year 2026. This gives you a sort of rundown of what's been approved to date for all the vehicle incentive programs in order to give you a sense of the change in scale over time and the change in complexity. So we've had a number of programs that have have been set up through session law and then changed every year, sometimes twice a year, with different program guidelines that were put in place for Mileage Smart, for example. There were a number of changes. But you can see how the funding has grown over the years, and it really pointed us in the direction of creating a separate unit to be able to really handle all of these funding sources, the three main federal formula funds, and then the state funding for both vehicle incentive programs and then vehicle charging. So I won't go into this in great detail, only to say that with the funding that was awarded last year, $26 million for the vehicle incentives and for the EV charging, the level of complexity has really pointed to the need for a separate budget and a separate unit to manage all of these different programs. This gives you a snapshot of last year's appropriation, so how it breaks down for the various incentive programs, where we are in terms of vehicle registrations here in the state of Vermont, 7,500 as of July 2022. That's probably about 8,500 at the moment.
EVs registered.
EVs, yeah.
So what
So
percentage?
that's both battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids.
Oh, wow.
And it's
That's
just
not
over
bad.
50% split in favor of battery electric vehicles.
So out of registered, what percentage then is that?
So if we're at about 8,500, which would make sense given the pace of things, that would be about 2% of total vehicle registration. So not a
It was
whole
3,000
lot
a
at the
couple
moment.
years ago, so it's coming up. It's,
Yeah.
Well, there's more available.
That's right.
Do you know what the percentage is of new car sales?
And so over the past year is about 6.5%. The later months, I think in November, it rose above 8%. So
So it's rapidly changing.
it's definitely, you're seeing a curve to the growth in EVs for sure. These just give you a rundown of kind of what's been done over the past year in terms of vehicles incentivized and the amount of funding that's been issued and how much of that has gone to folks, households with lower incomes.
On corridor 50 kilowatt, what are the other funds? Oh, I see over 100. Just
Over 100, that's right.
At least 50 to
Yeah.
be considered a fast charge.
So we have a couple of different grant agreements. Andrew mentioned the interagency work group that we have with Department of Environmental Conservation, Department of Public Service, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and BGS, Buildings General Services, has also joined us. And those prior rounds of funding have been managed through that interagency work group led by the Housing and Community Development Department. And so those have resulted in about 17 different locations that are in the process of being built out and should be completed by this year.
That's what the stars represent.
The stars represent what we've identified as 15 locations for the National Electric Vehicle
That would
Infrastructure Program.
meet the goals, because that's within a mile of each exit. That's what those stars are.
They need to be within a mile of each exit and within 50 miles of the next fast charging location. And we can go through it tomorrow, but the state has its own goals that are more aggressive than that.
But what are the stars again?
So these are
We're
the
going.
general areas of where we locate with the initial round from the national.
They're not
Electric-
there yet.
They're not there yet.
Okay.
There's the dots. So Virginia right now is the only on corridor over 100 KW we have.
That's right. So there's the green, I don't know if you can see the difference there. The green is where there are 7 locations that are being built out currently by Norwich Technologies through one round.
The green stars.
Yes, and by Blink Charging in an earlier round. And those are locations that are slated to be upgraded to the NEVI standards. So we're already invested in at least 2 fast chargers at those locations, and then to raise those up to the NEVI standards, which is 4 150 kilowatt stations that can charge simultaneously at that level 4 vehicles. We would upgrade to increase those to meet the standards.
So is there, so there's the 2 charge point at the exit 4 and Randolph. So I assume the Green Star means you're gonna expand that to 4.
Yeah,
And then
those
there's also a fast charger down in the village. When we thought it was gonna be 5-mile radius.
that's right. So there's the newest one is within a mile
Yeah.
in Randolph. The site host is not interested in working with the state on the NEVI program. We have one that's 3 miles into town where that is in process, and our plan is to upgrade that location.
Okay.
For the NEVI plan, we had to submit an exception request to be able to locate outside of that 1 mile radius. And that exception process just hasn't,
So even though they had 2 charge points, they didn't want to get 2 more.
that's, from what I understand from our vendor, we're not interested in that, so.
Okay, one more question.
I have the hypothesis that the users of these direct charge, fast charging stations are gonna be compared to a gas stations disproportionately more out of state travel through. I'm guessing Vermonters, locals are gonna charge at home and at work. Are we aligning the locations of these things with any type of additional presence for welcome to Vermont or thinking not rest stops, so to speak, but am I at all correct in thinking that these are gonna be more heavily used by people traveling through the state and not necessarily Vermonters?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is to build out a national network, so everyone, whether they're in state or out of state, has confidence to be able to move throughout Vermont. We will get into this tomorrow morning, but basically, you know, the first 15 locations are heavily guided by the program rules. We have a number of different data layers that we use to prioritize sites, and included in that is travel demand, which would naturally include out-of-state travelers and where people are really aiming to go. But we can get into more of how we kind of zoned in on these 15 initial locations tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we had to cut you off, but we don't have enough time. So
We're not gonna go.
you didn't allocate enough time.
If you don't go over the budget, that means you just get whatever you ask for.
Perfect.
Right.
Around the house, Robin.
Yeah, but
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Inviting us in.
Tomorrow morning.
yeah.